record. So I think we're good. Okay, so we've got a little spiel to go through, and then we'll do questions at the end. We are live on Facebook, and we're going to be using this as a resource. So I might cut it off before the QA. But basically, my name is Cami Ross. I'm a study abroad advisor. I am one of the liaisons that works with disability services, and I'm also here joined by Kaylee Smitley from Disability Services to talk about how study abroad and disability services really team up to provide support for students to study abroad. So first off, people with disabilities can and do study abroad. They volunteer abroad, they intern abroad. You know, it happens all of the time. Our office works to remove obstacles to studying abroad in general. Students with disabilities or who need accommodations can take the same international opportunities as everyone else, and that's really what our goal is. What I am trying to do is to help students navigate any access to barriers along the way. So October, it's still October, is Disability Awareness Month. At Case Western, we're working together to foster an environment of inclusion. Okay, there we go. So, you know, one thing to keep in mind is disabilities are everywhere. Around 15% of the global population, over 1 billion people, live with some form of disability. When I've been talking with students, they're like, yeah, but I don't know. I'm like, there are blind people everywhere. There are people with learning disabilities everywhere. There are people everywhere with your same concern. You're not unique in the sense that you're from America. It really is something that is across the board. In recent years, our understanding of disability has moved away from a physical or a medical perspective to one that takes into account a person's physical, social, and political context. Great strides have been made to make the world more accessible for people living with disabilities. However, much more work is required to meet their needs. It's important to remember that the United States has a comprehensive definition, and it's not necessarily the definition of disability across the world. And so is a common accommodation here is possibly not even a consideration in other countries. Since Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the American Disabilities Act, America's been working to improve accessibility across our country. Outside of the United States, people with disabilities are, of course, subject to the laws of the host country, though. Thus, a lot of locations that we work with might not be ADA compliant. Like I said, our office has efforts to remove barriers whenever possible and to understand that there can be limits. So, like I said about Section 504 in American Disability Act, one of the positives, though, is that even though we are the often golden standard for disability accommodations, many other countries are making great strides. For example, in Japan, much of their public transportation has been actually designed by a blind architect. And so there are a lot of wheelchair accessibility, vision impairment accommodations, all kinds of things that really are superior to what we have in the United States. And so, you know, it might be worse other places, it might be better other places, and that's what we like to talk about. So by the numbers, who goes abroad? I was saying that students with disabilities obviously study abroad, and it shouldn't stop you from seeing the possibilities. So in this graph, it shows the percentage distribution of disabilities by type. About 50% have learning disabilities, 20% have mental disabilities, 15 other. Then we're down to sensory and physical disabilities. The key to studying abroad is planning ahead and understanding that attitudes and accommodations abroad vary by country. Understanding your accommodation needs help in selecting the best study abroad option for you. If you're planning to study abroad, you are not required to inform the Office of Education Abroad of your disability. But, this is a big but, many accommodations require planning. And requests for accommodations should be made as early as possible, preferably right before the program acceptance or even as we're selecting programs with you. Thus, if you're able to let us know and inform us, we really can help you make the best decisions from the onset and then help everything come into place as it goes along. If you are a Case Western student, you're already registered with Disability Services, your accommodation information is not automatically transferred to us. It really is about informed consent. You have to let us know so that way we can help. So these are some questions just to think about. How will my disability affect which study abroad program I consider? We work with partners all across the world, some of which are very hands-on, some of which are rather hands-off. Depending upon what needs you have, we can definitely point you in a direction where, for example, test-taking accommodations could easily be made. Some places in the world, it's going to be faculty by faculty, and they might not understand what you're asking. And so that's where really having a conversation with us is so important. Will I disclose my condition to the Office of Education Abroad or to the host program? It might not be something that you need to disclose. I'm just trying to say that the more you let us know, the more we can talk through things. How will I plan ahead to manage my condition before going abroad? A lot of times this has to do with setting yourself up for success, meeting with your doctor to go through your plans, having medication on hand if needed, having letters on hand as needed. Again, that's something that we're happy to work with you. What barriers might you encounter, both in planning to go on abroad and while abroad, and how will you overcome them? Sometimes, for example, a short-term program. Some of our students more on the spectrum, that's a lot to handle for a week. So how are you going to handle that? Are you going to maybe talk with your faculty member and say, hey, I know we have this plan and this plan and this plan and this plan all day, but I might need a little bit of time to just relax in the hotel room for a little while because that's a little sensory overload for me. You know your own obstacles and start planning to overcome them. How will the resources that you have differ from what you're used to? That's where Kaylee is here to kind of talk about what some case studies are that we've worked through on our end. But like I said, there are a lot of things in terms of accessibility and accommodations that really do differ in the world. What activities or excursions abroad will you be able to or not be able to participate in? You know, we've often, this is something that we can work with. If it's a short term, we can work with faculty. You know, if you need ramps or, you know, you're concerned with the roads being cobblestone, or, you know, how can you get into this building or not? Sometimes that's a planning thing, you know, having a discussion ahead of time, and there are possibly a few options we could do that would work out a little bit better. Or like I said, it might be something where you might just step back and say, you know what, this is too much for me anyway. You guys have fun. I'll be back and I'll join in with everything else later in the day. If So like I said, talk with your doctor. You need access to medication, supplies, medical services. What will that look like abroad? Do you have a latex allergy? Is that something that you really need to find out if that's a standard issue that you're going to have to deal with or not? Would you need documentation for travel? Are you going to be traveling with syringes? Will you need refrigeration? Do you need to travel with dry ice for long period, like for a long flight? Those are all things that you need to discuss. You also need to discuss if a medication that you're on is even legal in the country that you're going to. Some ADHD medications are illegal in certain locations. Gender affirming hormones can, be something that you have to have a discussion about. These are all things that, again, will point you towards resources and help you talk with people on the ground to figure out what you can and maybe what you need to plan around. So before you go, talk with us. I've mentioned this a few times, but really it's very important. Talk with us about your particular needs, about options, maybe country-specific issues. Speak with other disabilities, students with disabilities to learn about their experiences. If we don't have a student that's had a disability that's gone to a certain program, I'm sure we can find someone that you can talk to that's an alumni of similar, if not the same program. We are connected with international education study abroad staff across the country. And so a lot of times we can say, hey, has anyone sent a student with, this accommodation to this place that could connect with our student? That's something that we're happy to do. And of course, connect with disability resources to request your letter of accommodation that could be shared with us, or who could pass along information. So, Kaylee, we've got some case studies to go through.
Yes, so the names I used are from Riverdale, if anyone gets a thrill of recognition there. These are based on situations that we have had come up before with some students registered with our office. And I kind of wrote them as theoreticals just so that students could sort of try to consider for themselves how they might want to prepare and what they should do. So the first one is a very typical situation. Testing accommodations are by far some of the most common accommodations that students are eligible for at Case Western, because there are so many different diagnoses, physical and mental, that could impact testing. In this situation, we said that Betty Cooper receives testing accommodations at Case Western due to trouble concentrating, including additional time, so extended testing time, and the ability to test in a reduced distraction environment, which we have a testing center at Case for that. She takes a stimulant medication also, and without it, her ability to focus is even more compromised. So really the questions are kind of, what are some things that Betty might want to consider when she's trying to evaluate different potential study abroad sites? And then before she goes abroad, what should she do personally to prepare? So I know we have one student with us, but kind of for the sake of kind of going through this, I would like all of you to kind of consider, if you're watching this, from your own kind of perspective, the answer to these questions and maybe some things that might come up for you. But typically what my office would advise, Betty should look into how testing is handled at different institutions. There are some universities that do offer accommodations to their own students, and so we'll already have a coordinator that she could connect with and speak to. If not, she might want to start initiating that conversation with her study abroad advisor and with our office so that we can start working on communicating to that site and try to see like what might be possible. Could they arrange for a separate room? Could they arrange for a proctor to give additional time, etc.? More importantly, with stimulant medications, in the United States, typically, and this varies state by state, but if you are a person that has ADD or ADHD, you already know, a lot of times you are not able to get a several month supply. Typically, these are only given on a monthly basis. And so something that you might want to consider before going abroad is whether you would be able to get the medication when you're overseas, or if there is a way that you can get access to your prescription before you go. So just typical things to think about. Okay. So the second is also based on a situation that has come up before. As we know, Case Western has a lot of students that are pursuing engineering degrees. And so study abroad can be really wonderful for engineering students because potentially based on site, you might be able to choose a place to travel to where you would actually be able to participate in kind of practical applications. So Archie Andrews is an engineering student who would like to be able to apply some of his skills when studying abroad. He's considering sites that would allow him to partner with humanitarian organizations focusing on building sustainable shelters or latrines. Archie has anxiety. He was granting a housing accommodation in Case for a private room so that he could decompress and better employ his coping skills. Archie also sees a therapist regularly as part of his treatment plan. What should Archie consider when looking at study abroad opportunities, and how should he prepare? So basically the same questions, but with a different set of circumstances. These are also things that should be considered before going abroad. So first of all, we've already discussed, I know Cami has gone into detail about, evaluating different locations, trying to see what's possible and what's available. Part of that is going to involve housing. Typically, there are some sites that will offer like traditional residential housing, like residence halls, kind of similar to what we have at Case. There are some other opportunities where students have lived with host families. There are some study abroad programs where I believe students have chosen their own housing, and it's just kind of been like you show up, you arrive, you choose where you're going to live. Occasionally housing might be provided, but it's not going to be a traditional residence hall. So really there are a lot of different options. Something to consider though might be based on your diagnosis, what works best for you. Are you going to need your own space? Is it better for you to live among fellow students or apart? Do you need your own kitchen? Do you need your own bathroom? Things of that nature. Something else to kind of think about too is if you are involved in a current treatment program. So if you are someone who sees a medical professional regularly for a physical diagnosis, or if you are an individual that works with a therapist or works with a psychiatrist or a mental health professional, what you may also want to consider is how can you connect with those resources when abroad? Some things that may be possibilities might be doing telehealth. So is there a way that you could speak with your provider via phone or via computer by Zooming and still kind of engage in some therapy or some treatment? If not, is there somewhere affiliated with a particular university or site that you could go and be treated when you were abroad? And licensure requirements vary from country to country and area to area. So that might be something you'd want to explore. And kind of what are your options? So, is there a hospital nearby if you're someone that has a physical diagnosis? Do you have, travel insurance, and what does that cover for you when you're abroad? What does medical treatment look like when it's in a different country? And this is going to vary, of course, based on your diagnosis and the likelihood that you might need treatment. But I would encourage students to kind of consider the worst case scenario. So if things do get really bad and you are a person that you're kind of like, well, it's potentially something that could happen where I'm hospitalized, or it is something that could happen where I will need to see a doctor very urgently. Kind of consider what your options are based on some of the locations that you're looking at.
So one of the resources that I really wanted to highlight is Mobility International. This is really the best organization out there. They handle study abroad and accessibility. They cover autism, blind and low vision, health issues, deaf and hard of hearing, learning disabilities, mental health, physical disabilities, all of that. They have a lot of really good storytellers, students who have studied abroad and overcome obstacles and really gotten a lot from their experience. They have all kinds of resources about questions to ask, how it could be done, where to go. There's a lot of really good stuff there. There are also some other resources to bring to mind. Department of State has resources for Americans traveling with disabilities. A lot of times they are country specific. So that's a very good resource. There also are a lot of other study abroad providers out there that have really good blogs and vlogs and stories personal stories from students who have traveled abroad and studied abroad. IFSA Butler is one, IES Abroad is one. We also have a national organization called NAFSA that we work with in our office, and they have really good information about students studying abroad with disabilities. And of course, our disability resources and accommodations on our website and through disability services. All right. So I think that's the end of this. I am going to just real quick see if there's any questions on Facebook. And then I'm going to stop recording. Super good.